Got it. Okay. I guess maybe I'll just start by reminding everyone to go ahead and hit mute. Just that helps a little bit with background noise. And since we are recording, Mark, just hit record so that we can have this in the archives, I guess, for folks who couldn't join us, or I don't know. I certainly don't want to hear myself talking. So again, thank you very much for joining us tonight, especially anybody who maybe hasn't attended one of these sessions before. Glad to have you. My name is Danielle Lawson, and I've been a member at Midvale for, gosh, probably, I think about 20 years. Certainly miss you all. Um, I'm greeting this weekend, so yay, glad to be back. But so yeah, thank you so much. So in case you aren't sure which group you joined tonight, this is the racial justice group at Midvale Community Lutheran Church, and we are doing these sessions about I think every 2 months on the even months, Mark says. So here we are in October. The next one will be in December planned, and we hope you'll join us again, or spread the word to have people join us. We are just a committee of people who feels passionately about the topics that we're presenting on. And I will qualify before we get too far and say I am not a scholar of redlining or housing discrimination. I literally owned one house for 23 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. It is, as as events have unfolded, and as the sort of the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know, and that is really kind of what's driven me to do a little bit more work on this and to do some research. So again, I am not a scholar in this. I've learned so much as I've prepared for tonight, but again, it has just shown me how much I don't know. And I could have prepared for the next year and a half and not felt ready to go. So I hope you'll bear with me, because it's some of the points that I felt were easiest to present on in some ways, but also the most pertinent maybe as an intro. And maybe you'll do a little bit more work after we're done here tonight, and someday tell me what you learned, and I would love that. So thank you. Before we get started, any questions at all? Anything I've forgotten, Mark? One thing I think I forgot is we have until about 8 o'clock tonight, but maybe we won't need that much time, depending how long our discussion goes, but that just wanted to set that out there. And certainly if you do want to ask a question, I think there's an option to unmute yourself. We'll have a few slides, my PowerPoint, whatever you want to call it, and some talking points. We'll break out into a discussion group and have a moment to talk amongst each other and talk a little bit about what we've discussed, maybe what some of your experiences have been. We'll come back together again for a little bit, break out one more time, and then come back together and maybe talk a little bit more and then wrap it up. So I guess put your feet up and grab a glass of water or whatnot. Okay, awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then I'm going to get the slide deck started. So I think if I do this, Yep. Come on, that's what I'm saying. Okay, and also just so you know, this is I may refer down to some notes. Again, I'm not in a position where I've memorized everything and can just speak extemporaneously on this topic. So I do have some notes. Forgive me if I'm looking down a little bit, but I'm hoping that I can provide some additional material beyond what's just on the slides, and those are some of what my notes are. So thank you very much, and certainly feel free to interrupt, ask questions, interrupt, whatever you need to do. So yeah, our topic tonight, redlining. I will say not only am I not a scholar on this topic, but I think it was only in the last 10 years or so that I even, thought to look up what that is. And for me, that I want to acknowledge that that is such a place of privilege to not know what redlining is. Um, and I think the only thing to say to that is when you know better, you do better. And that's part of the reason I've wanted to educate myself. So um, redlining will we've kind of passed housekeeping, and I hope when we do breakout rooms, if you all don't know each other, and I think most of you do, but please do introduce yourselves, and I think I know most of you as well too. We'll start with a little bit of explaining what redline is technically, and maybe what some broader definitions are. Take a look at kind of where it began, why it began, and see where the history of that has led us to now. We'll break out and we'll look at where we're at today, a little bit more recent history up to today, and then maybe we'll look at some possible solutions that I've come across. There certainly will be many more than what I'm presenting here, and then we'll break out one more time. So that's our agenda. All right, I am going to move you all down here so I can read my slide. Perfect. So I started really just by trying to find a usable definition of redlining. Again, this was not a term that was familiar to me, and until I was in adulthood, it was not taught to me in history classes or any other civics classes. Redlining is a discriminatory practice that puts services, financial and otherwise, um, out of reach for residents of certain areas based on race or ethnicity. And that's the source of where I pulled that from. Now, when you're looking at those different services, financial and otherwise, financial aspects can include anything from credit, which might be the obvious one, but could be also insurance and other financial things. Services can be even things like healthcare facilities and supermarkets. Those are all things that, if you think about really current events today, what we're looking at as far as the grocery store that's on Park Street that they're having trouble putting into that development. Those are all things that continue to be impacted with redlining. And then really, it's not just about purchasing homes, it's also about the underdevelopment of of infrastructure, things like utilities, paving of streets, all those kinds of things. So those are the financial and other types of services for what redlining is. All right, so give you a little bit of a background here, and forgive me if some of this is really obvious, if some of you maybe did study this, or maybe even lived through some of the decades we're going to talk about, and saw it firsthand. But I'm gonna take us back to the Great Depression and the New Deal, and talk about where the origins of redlining were there with the government programs. The government programs were designed to increase home ownership, which sounds like a very noble thing to do. They just went about it a little bit weird. The government programs included government issued bonds and government backed loans, but that were often used to refinance mortgages as well as purchase homes. And those that were part of the homeowners loan corporation, or other policymakers, it was usually a collaboration of white people. I mean, there's no other way around that, to say that it was policymakers, realtors, appraisers, developers that decided really where to build homes and other services. And it was determined that Black, and also very often ethnic neighborhoods, and I'll show you that on a map in a coming slide, that they were never going to appreciate or increase in value. So they were too risky to invest in. And that's really how those areas were determined as to where loans would be given or grants were provided to people based on these maps. And so that's what these the Black neighborhoods were assigned the highest risks, with using the color red. Uh, I think hence that's where we get that term redlining. Um, and they were also included racially restrictive covenants that were included in deeds of homes, that prevented people of color from purchasing those homes and moving into predominantly white neighborhoods. I think we had heard, some of us maybe were on a call with um, Leanne Puglielli and Pastor Everett about talking about Nakoma, the neighborhood here on the near west side, and that they had looked into the deeds of many of their homes and found that there were racially restrictive covenants, and they had worked to remove those. So that's just kind of an example of that. What they did call them was residential security maps, and these were maps of American cities that were used by underwriters and municipal planners. And again, those were color coded neighborhoods based on racial demographics and local amenities and housing values. They had green, and again, I think I've got another slide, I'll show you that, but green for best, blue for desirable, yellow for declining, and red for hazardous. The hazardous neighborhoods were often precluded from receiving loans or investments for improvements. And that really had created the urban inequality that we see today. And these maps were eventually included in the National Archives. So they have been in use for a long time. And if we don't make some changes, they would continue to be used. This last bullet on here, Marty, I don't know if you feel like maybe you want to unmute and elaborate a little bit, but Marty and I had a brief discussion yesterday about some information he had read about post-World War II loans to white soldiers.
I was really, I don't know how I came across it. I put it in a file and I didn't call Danielle until recently.
No,
So
I
I
didn't call you back.
apologize
That's on me.
for not being better prepared. But what I saw was that instead of the Veterans Administration administering the loans, a Southern senator said, no, we need the states and localities to control who these loans go to. So that gave white bank owners the opportunity to deny loans. And one of the first statistics I saw was, let me 1 second where I have that, that at the end of World War II in the New York, New Jersey area, 67,000 applications were made for loans and 100 went to Black people. I almost fell out of my chair on that. And I realized that's, the national picture, but of course, that's where things are going to begin. So I'll be interested to hear how Dane County and Madison fit into this picture as time went on. That loan program ended in July of 1956.
It's staggering, especially when you consider these are soldiers returning home from fighting for their country.
Right.
Yeah, it just brings tears to my eyes. Oh, thank you. Okay, so we'll take a look specifically at Madison. This is the map I was referring to that I wanted to share. And I'm going to go to the live version of it here momentarily. But this map provides a historical look at racial segregation and wealth disparities across neighborhoods in Madison. You can see here's Mendota and Monona. So this is just a highlight. It compares the districts to recent data average of home values and racial demographics. So this is just a screenshot. I'm going to take you here to this link. We're going to pop over for 1 second. And I think hopefully you follow along. Are you there? Yep. You've got the map now over here and it's moving around? Not yet?
Not yet.
Oh, huh. All right. Well, Mark, we did it in practice. What did I do differently?
Are you clicking on the icon on the bottom of your screen to your home page? Desktop, your desktop. You want to make sure your desktop is showing it.
I have no idea how to change that.
Because
You've
you
got
went
to
to
be kidding.
PowerPoint to display this, and then you went over to your web browser to do the link.
So what are you're just seeing the static map? Oops, sorry, go back to this one.
Yep, that's what we're
Okay,
seeing.
let's see. I'm going to share a different screen. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing first. And then I'm going to share a different screen. Let me try this now. Let me try this. Okay. Okay, how about now? Did it change? Phew. Okay. Thank you. All right. I really wanted to do this because I'm going to zoom in a little bit and give you guys a little bit more perspective. Here is our north. So again, to get your bearings, the capital should be right here. Okay. Right here on the isthmus. You can see over here a little bit of information about those areas, as I was mentioning, the good, desirable, declining, and hazardous. This is based on information, again, from 1940. I've also seen 1937 quoted a little bit. I wanted to scroll down. I wanted you to see some of this, the way they've described some of these areas. So C5, and when I hover here, it highlights where that is. If you can see this area here, business and industry to east, bordering on foreign and Negro section in area D2. As we get down, things start to get a little stark, like I don't even, offensive, I almost would say. So this D2 here, as you can see this area highlighting, I mean, it goes into some, these are policymakers that are speaking about people in Madison in this way. Like they're talking about, ethnic characteristics and about generalizing, I think is really, another shocking thing I felt when I saw this is they're lumping entire races and ethnicities into, two sentences that talk about their ability to pay loans back and what their employment status is, and some of those other things that just seem so very wrong. So again, I wanted to just give you a little bit of your bearings here. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, where we're at didn't include, for example, like Midvale Community Lutheran Church. I thought that would at least be like one common place we all knew where it was. But as you can zoom in, and it really is hard to see, but there are street names around like West High School over here, and this is Forest Hill Cemetery, as you can see. So again, just kind of getting your bearings on where those neighborhoods are and were. And look, we've got green and blue over here, not a whole lot of green over here, lots of red over here. So I'm including that link, and if you're at all curious, you can take a look, and zoom in and try to digest a little bit about where those locations were and why, and take a look at some of the things like railroad tracks and the descriptions that they've given as far as like where there's industry, they call it, but I think in some ways that's code, for factories and less desirable things that had, certain negative characteristics. So I'm going to go back, I think, to my PowerPoint. Everybody flip back with me? If I flip down to this slide about Madison, perfect. Good. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me on that. Oh, I forgot to look at my notes on this one. Madison is one of 239 US cities that had these maps done for them and that were redlined, if you want to use it as a verb, by Homeowners Loan Corporation. In Wisconsin, other cities were Milwaukee, Oshkosh, Racine, and Kenosha. The cities weren't all necessarily small across the country. They weren't necessarily the big ones. I was surprised at some of them that were part of the process, but the 239 cities. And there are obviously maps we can look at for that too. I wanted to mention too that in 1940, 80% of the Black population lived in just 3 out of Madison's 20 wards, concentrated on the south side near those industrial zones. So that's kind of in this area here. And then there was another small concentration of Black folks that lived or exist that were on the near east side over here. And so again, this talks a little bit about, why those areas were where they were, and what the characteristics were that caused them to be less desirable. So, okay, jumping over to Madison again. In the 20s and 30s, that development of the west side was seen as being more exclusive and had more of those restricted suburbs. Now remember, keep in mind the west side was really more what we would call the near west side now. Westmoreland, Tacoma, those areas. We think west now and we're like out in Middleton. No, that wasn't even part of it at this point. As I mentioned, the concentration of industry that was on the east side. And again, remember, near east side, we're looking at East Washington Avenue before its revitalization that's been happening. A lot, think Mott's Paint, think of all those places that kind of are on that stretch there. As I mentioned, that there were these zoning policies that looked at these use barriers that included things like railroad tracks and racial demography. Some of you may be familiar with areas like the Triangle, and that's an area that coincidentally, maybe, I don't know, has currently been under a large amount of construction. If you've driven down Regent Street anytime recently, you see a giant hole in the ground. But that area is where that was, and it was deemed as a poor investment. It would never get better. And then, as I mentioned about Tacoma, also Maple Bluff, like think about these homes that were so large that they were maybe on the lake, that they had a lot more, like, I don't want to say acreage, but like the yards were bigger. Like these were all more desirable things that kept getting more and more investments to them. And so they were maintained and really kept in a family for quite a long time. They weren't continually sold. So like that. So that does bring me to our first breakout session. I think Mark's gonna manage the mechanics of this, but I'm going to see if while we're in the breakout sessions, if I might be able to post a couple of these questions, but some things that just maybe some conversation starters or things that you want to talk about a little bit. I thought were what were some barriers for you when you purchased your first home? And what I'm getting at that is kind of compare what you thought of as a barrier to maybe what some other folks were experiencing as a barrier. Was your experience as a white home buyer the same or different, do you think, than someone who was Black? You know, how did you decide where to look or where to purchase your home? Did it feel like you could have looked really anywhere? You were open to any part of town, wherever that may have been. Maybe it wasn't Madison, you know, but or did you feel like there were only certain areas you could look in? Maybe it was financial, you know, maybe not. How was that experience working with your lender? Did they feel like, did it feel like they were treating you fairly? Were they being respectful? You know, and maybe I'm only guessing here and don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but you know, maybe if it was a long time ago, did the lender just really want to only work with the man of the household? Things like that. And then do you think your experience would be different today? Maybe some of you have bought a home more recently, and you know, what did that look like compared to the first time? So again, just really some conversation starters, and I might pop into a couple of the rooms and check in, see how it's going, and don't mind me. You can kick me out too, I suppose. When you do come back in, I think you will be muted again, but so remember when you go into your breakout rooms that you may have to unmute yourself. And I'm wondering, I hope everybody, I think if you have your cameras on, that's great, especially in the breakout rooms. There probably will be, I think if there were 11 or 12 of us, Mark, what do you have, like three or four in a room?
2 breakout rooms, so we're going to be divided in half.
Okay, perfect.
And how
All
long
right.
do you want the breakout rooms?
Oh, thank you. Yes. There's a lot to talk about here. So I'm thinking around 10 minutes, but if I pop into let's see, it is 7 o'clock now. If I pop into a breakout room and y'all are talking about what to make for dinner tomorrow, then maybe we'll grab you back sooner.